I left the gang life for my wife, only to discover she deceived me for more than 10 years. I quit the gang life for my wife, but she lied to my face for over a decade, so I spent years taking everything from her. I was 19, fresh out of jail, when my girlfriend Lisa sat me down and dropped the bombshell. She was pregnant, and it was mine. She was nervous, but really wanted to keep the child. I didn't need much time to think. The supposed love of my life was pregnant with my child, and it was time to be a man. That was the day I turned my back on the gang life for good, leaving behind a path that only led to death or more jail time. I proposed to her soon after, and she said yes. I went to a trade school to become a mechanic and busted my ass for my future family. When my daughter Emma was born, it was the most intense day of my life. Lisa wouldn't stop bleeding. She went into shock, and they had to give her an emergency C-section. She was in the hospital for months, but eventually made a full recovery. She finally came home, and I catered to her every need until she was back to full strength. When Lisa started feeling like herself again, Emma became my world. I wanted to give her the best life, one far better than ours. When Lisa was released, I promised her that our daughter would have a life far better than ours. And for years, I kept that promise. I saved enough money to move us to the suburbs, became homeowners, and was Emma's #1 cheerleader. I made sure she went to private school, knew how to defend herself, and always made sure I was the perfect husband. As the years went by, I owned my own garage. My cousin Alex, whom I considered my best friend, became a pastor, and my relationship with my wife was stronger than ever. I made sure I kept my prison body. But Emma hated me since she turned 13. She just started hating me. She didn't want me to hug her, rolled her eyes every time I told her I loved her, and ignored me when I asked her about her day in school. It hurt me, and Lisa saw it. She told me that she's a teenager and that I should just let it ride. I wanted to show Emma how much I loved her, so for her quinceañera, I wanted to go all out. I got everything she wanted, and she was still disrespectful. Briefly, the old me almost came out just to put her in her place. But instead, I went to my cousin Alex, vented my frustration and doubts about being a good father, and he told me to just let her be and said a prayer for me. I wanted a slideshow for the father-daughter dance. I got a chunk of the pictures of us together, but realized I didn't have any recent pictures of us. She didn't want to take any. The last time I had pictures of her and me smiling was on her 13th birthday, and those were on Emma's broken tablet. I took that tablet to a repair shop and didn't care about the cost. After a day and $300, the tech fixed it, and I was happy. Little did I know that this happiness would soon be followed by the biggest heartbreak of my life. I opened her tablet, and the instant messages appeared. It was Emma talking to my wife. It was a long banter that she didn't want me to dance with her, and it did hurt. But like my wife said, she's being a teenager. Then she said something that destroyed me. She texted why she had to do the father-daughter dance with me since I'm not her father. I wasn't her father. I wasn't. I felt my heart stop, got dizzy, my mouth dried up, and I needed to sit down. My wife responded that I raised her, loved her, and that made me her father. But Emma responded by saying that Alex is her father, and she can't wait for her to turn 18 so she could tell me the truth and live with her real dad, that she hated me, that she thanked God that I'm not her father. Lisa began cussing her out, saying that it was a mistake for Alex to tell her the truth 2 years ago. The more they talked, the angrier I got. My wife lied to me for 15 years. My cousin, whom I confided in about Emma and my fears about being a bad father, not only slept with my wife, but had me raise his child. I wanted to hurt them. I felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and grief. I wanted to scream, cry, and die at the same time, if that makes any sense. I went to a dark place and decided to talk to my old public defender instead. I drove to Manhattan and saw my old public defender, who wasn't a low-level attorney anymore. He had a nice, expensive firm near Midtown East. I was surprised that he remembered me, but apparently I was his first case as a public defender. We sat down, and I told him everything, gave him the tablet, and when he turned it on, the messages just kept coming. Only this time, Emma was talking to Alex, her real father. He was telling her to give me a chance. how I was always there for her. But Emma told him that so was he. How it makes sense that they have so much in common, and even called him Papi multiple times in their conversation, and he responded and told her that she was his little girl. We went through our options, and he asked me what I wanted to do. I told him that I wanted to go full scorched earth. He asked me several times if that was what I wanted, and I nodded. I also told him that everything had to be filed before the quinceañera in 2 weeks. We spent the next 12 hours working on what needed to be done, and I followed his instructions to the letter. I secretly placed my business for sale, called the private school, and told them that I would not be paying for next year, closed the college accounts and the savings that I had for Emma, and prepared to place my house for sale online. No one was the wiser. I followed his instructions perfectly. There was only one thing I deviated from. The day of the quinceañera went off without a hitch. The whole family was there. Emma was smiling, having fun. Lisa kept asking me if I was okay, and I lied to her. It was hard lying to her. From the moment I met her, I never lied to her. And during those 2 weeks, every time I kissed her, held her, made love to her, it was hard not to scream at her. It was hard not to hate her. She knowingly let me raise another man's child. She slept with my cousin, a man I saw as my brother, the godfather of my child, the best man when I eloped, my confidant. The rage was hard to suppress, to say the least. When it was time for the father-daughter dance, I called Emma to the center of the stage. She looked annoyed but walked over. I had the music playing, and she smiled. It tore me apart seeing her smile at me. For years, I wanted to see that smile again, and now I didn't want it. As we danced, I had the slideshow playing, pictures of the two of us, and towards the end of the song, screenshots of her text messages with her mother and real father. Needless to say, this didn't bode well. Lisa looked like she saw a ghost. Emma just kept staring at the large screen, and my cousin just stared at me with fear. Lisa ran to me and told me that she could explain. I told her that I filed for a divorce and that she could explain it in court. She grabbed my arm, begging me, and I pulled back. I told Emma that I busted my ass to give her the world, and now she doesn't deserve it. I began to walk out, but not before telling my cousin that every time I see him, I'm going to knock him out. Then I knocked him out. The aftermath was harsh. Lisa and Emma were at my grandmother's apartment. Her family was shocked and disgusted with her. They wanted nothing to do with her. My grandmother had the audacity to tell me about the story of Abraham, and how when he came back from battle 3 years later, his wife had a 1-year-old child, and he raised him as his own. She said I should be like Abraham, so I told her to get the hell out of my house. Lisa came a few days later, crying as soon as she saw me, telling me that it was an accident, that when I was arrested she was so angry at me, and my cousin was there to console her. And one thing led to another, and they slept together. It happened only one time, and she was faithful to me ever since. She was willing to take a lie detector test to prove it. So I asked her how long she knew Emma wasn't mine, and she started crying more. That look she gave me just told me that she knew from day one. I asked her to leave. She wanted to go to counseling, telling me that I'm overreacting and we could make it work. It was in the past, and I needed to get over it. That I am Emma's father despite what happened. I allowed my temper to get the best of me. I must have repeated "get over it" over a dozen times at full volume while grabbing her things and tossing them out the door. I told her that I didn't want to see her face ever again, and that this life I built no longer belonged to her before shoving her out the door. A couple of weeks went by, and she kept blowing up my phone. Not once did Emma try to reach out to me. Lisa was shocked to learn that I sold my business, even more so when she learned that I had an open house. She came in screaming, telling the viewers to get out of her house and pleading with me to seek help. She claimed I was ruining our marriage and that I had no right to sell our home, the home where we raised our child. I told her that this house was full of lies, a house where I raised another man's child. When I sell it, I will give her half, and ordered her to get out before I called the cops. It was a bluff. All she had to do was play the victim, and I would have been arrested, but she didn't. She complied. Shortly after this, my cousin came to talk to me, and I knocked him out, dragged him outside, and closed the door. I refused mediation. Lisa wanted to reconcile, but I didn't. I wanted a divorce, and my attorney filed for a fast-track divorce. In 3 months, we were in the Nassau County Courthouse. I barely spoke to anyone during that time. My attorney took care of everything. First, Lisa's lawyer tried to talk about my past when I was in a gang, as if my past barred me from being a good husband and father, but my attorney quickly smacked that down. The judge reprimanded her attorney for trying to shame someone who turned their life around. My attorney presented all the evidence and offered a lump sum alimony payment with the pending sales of the house and business. At first, Lisa kept asking me to reconsider, but I ignored her. When she finally realized that I wasn't budging, she agreed. Yet the real surprise happened when it came to child support. My attorney presented all the text messages from Emma's conversation with Lisa, showing that not only did Emma know I wasn't her father, but she couldn't wait to be with her real father, saying she no longer had to live a lie. Lisa was completely caught by surprise from this. My attorney filed a motion to have my name removed from Emma's birth certificate, have my last name removed as well, and not be responsible for any child support, since all parties agreed that my cousin was her father. Lisa was shocked by this. She yelled at me, begged me not to do this to Emma, that I am her father because I raised her. As pathetic as it may sound right now, if Emma didn't act that way towards me, if she didn't say those things, I would have agreed. There were moments that I wanted to reach out and try to make it work. But then I would look at Emma's continuing text messages to her friends, her real father and mother, and I would refocus on my resolve. The judge was quiet for a long while, reading page after page of the text messages. In the end, she agreed. I was not financially responsible for Emma, and my name could be removed. My attorney also filed a motion for the courts to go after my cousin to pay for child support, and a motion to sue my cousin in civil court for all the money I had spent raising Emma. The private schools, dance classes, Girl Scouts, horseback lessons, everything I had ever spent on that child. After my attorney explained to the judge that my cousin committed fraud for knowingly allowing me to raise his daughter and not offer any financial support or assistance, it was a Hail Mary, and the damn judge agreed. I didn't bother looking at Lisa when the judge made her decision. I didn't bother listening to her as I walked out of the courthouse. I didn't care as I heard her cry, telling me that she only cheated one time and was faithful ever since. I just didn't care anymore. A few weeks later, my ex called me, shocked that I stopped payments on Emma's private schools and all of her activities. I told her to call her baby daddy before hanging up. Even Emma called me for the first time since this entire ordeal. She called me crying, saying that she had to go to public school, that they were moving to the old neighborhood, and how scary it was. She wanted us to be a family again. I told her to go to her real father, the man she truly wanted, and ask him. I yelled at her, told her that not only did she know for years, but I read all the text messages, the back and forth, and from her own words, she was thankful that a hoodlum like me wasn't her father, even though I hadn't been a hoodlum since the day I found out I was going to be a father. I hung up on her after that. I thought about ending it countless times, thought about ending my cousin, but I made him pay. He had to pay me $500,000, $500,000 that was all mine, and not 1 cent belonged to my ex because she agreed on the lump sum. I didn't care that the money came from the church. I was hurting. I left New York shortly after, went to Idaho as far away from New York as possible. I just picked a random state and city and left. I opened up a new shop, got a house, but for 2 years, I had trust issues. For 2 years, I saw a therapist, anger management, went to rage rooms. It was difficult until I found myself going back to church, and ironically, that was where I met my fiancée, Julie. Julie was wonderful. She had just turned 30 at the time, and we just hit it off. I told her everything that happened to me. I explained to her that I was going to have trust issues, and she understood. A year later, she told me that I was going to be a dad, and insisted that I get a DNA test just so I could have peace of mind. I forgot what it felt like to be happy again, and when my son was born, I was overjoyed. I called my grandmother for the first time in years. She cried when I told her about my son and insisted that I come to New York so she could meet her great-grandchild, guilt-tripping me by saying that she's 90 and would like to see me one more time. I agreed. We flew to New York, rented a car, and drove to Bushwick. The one thing I dislike about the hood is you only need to see one person from your past, and the whole neighborhood knows that you're back. My grandmother saw my son, met my fiancée, made an offshoot comment in Spanish about her being white, and I just yesed her to death. I was planning to spend the week, do the tourist thing for once. It was Julie's first time in her life in the Big Apple, and I wanted to make it special. Damn it, nothing works out as planned. First, my ex shouted my name from downstairs. I looked out the window and was surprised how fat she got. My grandmother told me in Spanish to talk to her, and Julie agreed. I went downstairs. It was awkwardly silent for a minute, and that anger just came back like a flood. Mary told me that I looked good and said that she looked like crap. She told me that she missed me, that she had never been with another man since the divorce, and I ignored her. She even had the audacity to tell me that I'm a grandfather. I gave her a look. Apparently, Emma got with a decent guy and got knocked up at 18. Her baby daddy joined the Marines to support them, and her father wanted nothing to do with her, just pays the child support and refuses to acknowledge her. He's no longer a pastor and is working at the Banco Popular 2 blocks over. Then she told me that Emma named the baby after me, and I couldn't stand looking at her. Mary wanted me to wait because Emma was on her way over, and I just walked away. I went to my grandmother's house, and I didn't have to tell Julie anything. She just knew, and we left. In the elevator, I told her what happened, and she smiled and told me everything was going to be all right. The look on Mary's face when we left the building, she was looking at my fiancé like she was the other woman, and Julie, without missing a beat, introduced my son to her. "Well," she said, "I would like you to meet his biological child." That was a knife twist, but she knew my pain. Mary kept trying to stop me from leaving, telling me that Emma felt bad about what she did, and Julie wanted me to make amends, but I was so angry. I hopped into the car, ignoring Mary's pleas. Julie told me to extend an olive branch, so I gave her my number so Emma could call me and left. At the red light, I saw my cousin by the Cuba Frito stand, and I don't know what came over me. I got out of the car, ran up to him, and beat the crap out of him. Julie was screaming, telling me to stop, and when we locked eyes, I could see the fear. I spit on him and left. A few months of no contact with anyone went by, but then on Father's Day, Emma tried calling me several times. I wanted to answer. I didn't, but all that kept lingering in my mind were those messages, what she said to her mother, to her real father, her friends. So I ignored it. Eventually, I listened to her voicemail, and she sounded so cheerful. She briefly apologized for her actions, but to me it didn't sound sincere, just passive. My grandmother and my fiancé told me to give her a chance. But when I asked my grandmother if Emma or Mary ever asked about me in the 4 years I left, she said Mary did constantly, but not Emma. So, in my twisted mind, I thought Emma wanted me in her life, so her child would be taken care of. After some appointments with a therapist, I decided to respond. I sent a small email to Emma that simply said, "What do you want?" I didn't expect her multi-paragraph response. She started the email profusely apologizing for how she acted. She said when she found out I wasn't her father, she was angry. She confronted her mother and she cried, making her promise not to tell me. Since she felt lost, she began to talk to my cousin, her real father, more and more. He told her of my violent past, the things I used to do, things that I kept a secret from her. This made her angry, and the more they spent time together, the more she pulled away from me. She said she felt bad from time to time, but my cousin would reinforce her feelings towards me. The day of the quinceañera, she said while we were dancing, she realized how stupid she was acting. She realized how much I loved her, and then her messages appeared on screen. In the days that followed, she was told by my wife's side of the family to give me space, to not call me, and she listened. She said she was watching her family fall apart because of her, and she couldn't do anything to fix it. She told me she understood why I did what I did, yet she wanted to reach out. Her grandfather kept telling her that I loved her, that I raised her, and despite what I saw through her messages, I would do the right thing, and she believed him. During the divorce, her mother fell into a dark place, not talking to her, barely eating. She was just existing. When she found out that my name was removed from her birth certificate, she said she had a panic attack. Her mother told her that they would have to move back to Brooklyn, and when she asked about her life in school, her mother told her, "That was the life your father gave you, and he's not your father anymore." So she called me, begging, and I cursed her out, then hung up. She cried for days. She tried to reach out to my cousin, who pretty much ignored her. She even went to the church, and he told her to leave, called her a mistake. Her mother refused to talk to her, basically locked herself in a room, only leaving to use the bathroom or take a shower. She begged her grandfather to take her to see me, and when they came to Long Island, she learned that I moved. Her grandfather told her that he would talk to my grandmother and find out where I went. For the next few years, according to her, it was hell. The entire neighborhood knew what happened to her and her mother. Her father avoided her at all costs and tried not to pay child support. It took her grandfather to threaten him to start paying. In the meantime, her mother didn't talk to her. She was just locked in her room. The few times they did speak, she called her an ungrateful girl and said she was the reason why she lost the love of her life. Her grandfather had to put her mother in her place by telling her that her infidelity was the reason why she lost the love of her life, and she locked herself back into the room. So, Emma barely stayed home, and that was how she met the father of her child. He worked in the corner bodega. They were the same age, and after a few months of talking, one thing led to another, and she ended up pregnant. Her grandfather was furious, but when her boyfriend insisted that he would marry her, that cooled things down. Emma said her pregnancy was a blessing in disguise. Her mother began talking to her again, and even began leaving the room to be by her side for every checkup. Being a senior in high school while pregnant was cliché, but she made it work. A month before the baby was born, she graduated, and her boyfriend joined the Marines. He wanted to elope before leaving, but she wanted a wedding. Her boyfriend had no issues naming his son after me. Apparently, his father was absent, and the fact he was a junior was a reminder that he shared the name of a man who didn't want him. When she heard I was in town, she got a speeding ticket trying to get to my grandmother's apartment. She wanted to see me, wanted to apologize, wanted me to see her son. She just wanted to see me. However, she was late, and she cried when her mother gave her my number. She wanted to call me immediately, but the entire neighborhood was talking about how I beat her father up, so she waited. Her mother was sad to see that I moved on and have a son. Emma was happy to know she had a little brother, but her mother became a little more depressed. I felt sorry for Lisa after I read the email. I called Lisa and asked her if this was true, that she refused to talk to Emma for years and blamed her for our divorce. She confirmed it, and at first I yelled at her, but I regained my composure when I heard her crying. I told her to move on, find someone else, but she said no. She told me that I was her husband, and I would always be her husband. It broke my heart a little. I then had my grandmother go see my cousin so I could talk to him. The second he heard my voice, he began to cry and begged me to forgive him. I just asked him why he didn't be a father to Emma, why he poisoned her against me, and he said it was envy. He was in love with Lisa, and I took her from him. When I was arrested, he consoled her, manipulated her, and barely lasted a second with her, and she realized what she was doing and shoved him off of her, but he already came. When she found out she was pregnant, he knew the baby was his. They both knew it was supposed to be a secret. Lisa took her double hysterectomy as God's punishment for her infidelity and deceit. When Emma turned 13, he was drunk, seeing my life, and envy was the one sin he couldn't shake, so he wanted to ruin it, and he did. I told him when we see each other again in hell, I will be his eternal torturer, and hung up on him. Julie was there for me. She told me that everything would be okay. Emma and I communicated through email. I spoke to her on the 4th. She spent over an hour crying while talking to me. I even spoke to her boyfriend, who asked me permission to marry her. I thought it was funny but honorable. My wedding is next month, and Julie wants me to invite Emma. At the same time, Emma wants me to give her away for her wedding in November. My future father-in-law sat me down and told me that he couldn't grasp my situation, but respected the road I took, because the road saved his little girl, gave him a handsome grandson, and a future son-in-law that he would kill for. That made me laugh, but he told me that I needed to let go of the anger and start forgiving but never forget. He's right. So we gave Emma and her fiancé an invite to my wedding and even offered to pay for their plane tickets. Leading up to the wedding, I was already on edge. Julie was the happiest I had ever seen her, and my in-laws were freaking out due to the number of people that were coming. I swear I think the whole town was invited. While all of this was happening, I was an hour and a half away in Boise waiting for Emma and her family at the airport. In the days leading up to her visit, we spoke a lot, her mostly crying and apologizing, and me just listening. When she couldn't speak anymore, I talked to her fiancé, who was more down to earth. When their plane landed, I was so scared not for seeing her again, but I was afraid due to my anger. I was afraid that I would lose my temper. The second she saw me at the terminal, she ran to me crying, and for a split second I saw my daughter when she was 7. It was weird picturing a child in my mind. She ran screaming, "Daddy," and the second she hugged me, she began to cry loudly. It was like a wail that caused so many people to look at us. She just kept saying sorry over and over, asking me to forgive her, and I just held her for over 15 minutes. She refused to let me go. After she composed herself, her fiancé properly introduced himself, and then they introduced me to their child. I won't lie, I cried. I wasn't angry, but I cried holding this infant. During the drive home, we talked about her fiancé's boot camp, how he's going to be a rear man, how Emma was going to college online to learn accounting, mostly catching up conversation. When we arrived at my house, Julie and her family had a feast ready for them. Since we've been together, Julie learned how to cook Spanish foods. But the week leading up to Emma's visit, she went a little overboard. She and Emma just hit it off. While Julie was introducing Emma to her family, I put the babies to bed and went to the porch for some fresh air. Emma's fiancé, Roberto, was standing by foot in the yard, staring at all of the space. For a moment, I wanted to give him the dad talk, but I felt that it wasn't my place. Instead, I asked him how he liked the view, and he was awestruck. I know the feeling living in the city the majority of your life. Wide open spaces are a marvel to take in. After a minute or two, he looked at me and told me how regretful Emma was. I've been with your daughter for 3 years, and not a day goes by when she doesn't mention how much she misses you and regrets what she did. Out of everything he told me, that single sentence constantly replays in my mind. The following day, I had to go to the shop, and Emma practically jumped in the car with the baby. Even Roberto told her it was okay and to enjoy herself. Emma looked like she was going to hyperventilate, and I told her that we'd work a half day, and I'd spend the rest of the day with her. That seemed to do it, and I slowly began to realize how traumatized Emma was. During the drive, I asked Roberto how bad she was. He said she has severe abandonment issues, constantly afraid that he's going to leave her despite him telling her that he never will. She calls him a lot, is a bit clingy at times, and in the beginning was afraid to be herself, in fear that they would break up. He had to reaffirm his love for her, just so she could let her guard down a little. This was my doing, I know that. But he doesn't blame me. He told me he completely understood why I did what I did. For the next couple of days, I spent all of my time with Emma, getting reacquainted with her. I took her to my in-laws' ranch and showed her the barns, the elks, and took her on a hike. 2 days before the wedding, I apologized to her for leaving. I apologized for the way I acted, apologized for the actions I took. She didn't want to hear any of it. She told me that there's nothing that I should apologize for. She said she knows she was the reason why it all fell apart, that she knows it was her fault. I had to stop her. I began to cry. I told her that it wasn't her fault. I was angry. I was hurt. And despite what happened, I should be the one to apologize. We both cried and just held each other. Emma appeared to be slightly better on the day of my wedding. She was happy. At the last minute, Julie made her a bridesmaid, and Roberto a groomsman. The wedding was beautiful. During the reception, I asked the DJ to play the song from Emma's quinceañera, and I asked her to dance with me. She was crying the entire time, holding on to me for dear life as we danced. I haven't felt this happy in a long time. I let Emma and her fiancé stay in my house, taking care of her little brother while I went to Hawaii for my honeymoon. When we got home, she was happy. She hugged us, and it felt great. Roberto told me that he's going to Camp Dwyer in Afghanistan and would like to know if Emma could stay near us. He would pay for an apartment near us until he could buy a house. Of course, I said yes. They went back to the city the day before yesterday. Emma and I are on a great path to healing, and her fiancé is a strong man. I can imagine Afghanistan is rough, but he'll be okay. Meanwhile, back in Idaho, life has settled into a new routine. Julie and I are stronger than ever, and our son is growing up fast. Emma calls me every day, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask for advice. It's like she's trying to make up for lost time, and I appreciate every moment of it. I never thought I'd find peace, but here I am, slowly but surely, healing from the past and looking forward to the future. A few months later, we received a letter from Emma's school. She had made the dean's list and wanted us to attend the ceremony. Julie and I were so proud. We booked a flight to New York and planned to stay for a week. When we arrived, Emma was waiting for us with a big smile on her face. Seeing her happy and thriving made all the pain and heartache worth it. She introduced us to her friends and professors, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of her life again. At the ceremony, as I watched Emma walk across the stage to receive her certificate, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She had come so far, and despite everything, she had made something of herself. After the ceremony, we all went out to dinner to celebrate. Emma and I sat next to each other, and she kept thanking me for coming. I told her that I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Back in Idaho, life continued to move forward. Emma and Roberto found a nice apartment near us, and she started working part-time at a local accounting firm while finishing her degree. She was determined to build a better life for herself and her son, and I supported her every step of the way. Roberto was doing well in Afghanistan, and we all wrote letters and sent care packages to him regularly. Emma often shared stories about Roberto with me, and I could see how much she loved him. It warmed my heart to see her so happy. One day, while we were out for a walk, Emma asked me if I would walk her down the aisle at her wedding. I was taken aback but overjoyed. I told her that I would be honored, and she hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. It was a moment I would never forget. As the months went by, we began planning Emma's wedding. It was going to be a small, intimate ceremony with close family and friends. Julie was excited to help with the preparations, and Emma was thrilled to have her involved. The bond between them grew stronger every day, and it was beautiful to see. Despite the tumultuous past, we had managed to create a sense of family and unity that I never thought possible. On the day of the wedding, everything was perfect. The sun was shining, and the garden where the ceremony was to take place was in full bloom. Emma looked stunning in her dress, and as I walked her down the aisle, I couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. This was my daughter, the one I had raised, and despite everything, we had found our way back to each other. When we reached Roberto, he looked at me with gratitude and respect. I placed Emma's hand in his, and as they exchanged vows, I felt a sense of closure and peace wash over me. This was the start of a new chapter, not just for Emma, but for all of us. The reception was a joyous affair. We laughed, danced, and celebrated the new beginning. At one point, Emma pulled me aside and handed me a small gift. Inside was a framed photo of us from her quinceañera, with the words, "Thank you for never giving up on me," inscribed at the bottom. I hugged her tightly, unable to hold back the tears. As the night drew to a close, I looked around at the faces of those I loved and realized how far we had come. The journey had been painful and difficult, but it had also been filled with moments of love, redemption, and forgiveness. I had found peace in my heart, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. Standing there with Julie by my side, Emma and Roberto starting their new life together, and my son playing with his cousins, I knew that the past no longer had a hold on me. We had built something beautiful out of the ashes, and I was grateful for every moment. As I looked at my family, I whispered a silent thank you to the universe for giving me a second chance. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was filled with love. And that, I realized, was all that mattered.